Hello, BookTube. As you've seen on this channel, since it's an almost daily appearance now, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club made a tag about yours truly. He made a tag in which he asks whether or not I have read all the books in his collection. He picks out 8 that he thinks maybe I haven't read. So not the big classics, not the modern, the high-profile new releases, but stuff that maybe strikes him as a little bit more off the beaten path that I might not have read. And he asks in his in his tag whether or not I've read them. And he scored 2. He scored 2 books that I haven't read. But his tag is taken off. Apparently a lot of you want to poke the bear like this. So lots and lots of people have done these tags. And I am determined now to do a video response to every person who does this, including Matthew. I haven't done one for him, but I will. And that number, that all-coveted number, that number of books that Steve has not read, has fluctuated at the low end of the scale the whole time. We've had people with 2 books that I haven't read out of 8 or 10, something like that. We've had people with 2 out of 6. We've had people with 3. We've had a few people whose names shall not be mentioned who were loitering down at 1. 1! One book out of all the ones they picked that I haven't read. And most famously, we've had 2 winners so far at 4. 4 books that I haven't read. Alan Moreton and Hannah at Hannah's Books are both at 4. And the contestants keep on coming. I have a new one today. And some contestants are a little bit more personal than others. And you know already which ones I mean. The fellow members of the OGBG. The Old Geezers Book Group. The 4 of us. The 4 Musketeers. The spreadsheets, the centerfolds in all of your teen magazines, where you've all sat with your heads together and your feet up in the air, comparing notes on which members of the OGB are the cute one, which one's the funny one, who's the serious one, who's the dark horse, which 2 might secretly dislike each other, all that girlish chatter that you've had. That's all going out the window as we now go at each other's throats. The first member of the OGBG that I have done who turned on me was Todd at Todd's Bursting Bookcase. Now we're doing Jason Harrigan at Byways and Bookland. How will he fare? How will he do? He picked 8 books, and like I mentioned with Todd's video, there are variables here in both directions. On the one hand, Todd and Mark Richardson Reads, and Jason have all read enormously widely. And that would seem to increase their chances of finding books that I haven't read. On the other hand, as I mentioned, we've got a bit of a Boys from Brazil situation going on here. I think that once upon a time, way back in the distant past, we might all have been about the same person. And some of those old reading habits don't die very easy. Some of them stick around. So there's a chance, there's a great confluence of reading, especially since with a lot of picks from the OGBG, the picks are from our misspent youth. And I think we largely misspent the same youth. So it could go either way. So let's see how Jason does, shall we? His first book is Experiences in Translation by Umberto Eco. Now, Jason went to some of his favorite authors for his answers to this tag, and he loves Umberto Eco. And I, like everybody else, deeply loved The Name of the Rose. And I didn't quite know what to make of huge chunks of Foucault's Pendulum. That's why I was very excited at the idea that Jason would give us a very learned, it sounded like an absolutely spot-on, loving read-through of Foucault's Pendulum. I'm hoping that he still does that at some point, because even listening to him talk about the book gave me a clear idea of how much of it I just plain missed. How much of it was incunabula that was known to Eco and that you had to know to really appreciate the book, which might sound off-putting, but not really. If an author as smart as Eco is willing to pour all this effort in, then I'm willing to pour effort into deciphering it. I certainly do that with other authors. So, but by and large, I mean, I love The Name of the Rose, but by and large, this is not an author I love anywhere near as much as Jason does. But Experiences in Translation is not fiction. It's a bunch of reflections and essays and period pieces and whatnot. And I have read. It's a yes. I was kind of hoping when I went into it that I would like his nonfiction better than the bulk of his fiction. That turns out not to be true, but again, it could be that I'm missing something, like I certainly seem to have been with Foucault's pendulum. Then the next one is an odd pick, and it would be a certain home run for Jason if it were done with, I think, a younger booktuber, but not with this one. Not with this. And the next one is Technological Slavery, which is a volume edited by David Skrbina, of the writings, if you want to call it that, of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who left a huge manifesto and lots of other disjointed jottings all around it. That stereotypical scene in Seven or whatever Hollywood movie you want to watch, where the detectives are pouring through the suspect's grubby apartment and they find notebook after notebook after notebook after hundreds of notebooks of obsessive graphological jottings. Kaczynski left a lot of that sort of stuff behind, in addition to his manifesto. And I lived through that time, of course. And it was vivid to me. It seemed like a direct impingement of just weird chaos magic into the what, for better or worse, seemed like the settled order of the world. So I read it. I would never do that now. Of course, Kaczynski style lone nut quasi-intellectual losers who leave behind long manuscripts are a dime a dozen now. Little did I know that what I originally thought about the Unabomber turned out to be true. It was a sign of a door opening, and just I thought it was the sign of a door opening and then closing again, but no, the door opened and stayed open. So half the mass gunmen, half the crazed lunatics who kill lots of people in the news every day. There's one in the news every day now. That was unthinkable in Ted Kaczynski's world, in the world we lived in then. Half of them leave manuscripts behind. I'm not going to read any of them anymore. And I don't know that anybody would print anything like that now, even with a scholarly introduction. I don't think anybody would do it now. The idea now in the news and in society at large seems to be that paying any kind of attention is what a lot of these lunatics want, and why they do what they do. And so you should spread the word that you're not going to get that attention. I don't think they're paying attention to whether or not that works, but one way or another, I would probably not do it, because now there's a Unabomber every day, or almost every day, and it strikes me as, I know this is going to sound horrible, but it strikes me as far more personal than it did then. Because it can happen to anybody now at any time. It happens so much now in America. I'm not talking about the rest of the world, of course. I'm talking about America. We are an insane country. Just totally. We always have been. But now we're insane in a suicidal way. Because you can't go anywhere. Anywhere where people gather in numbers of greater than 3, you are in statistically enormous risk of dying. Of dying if you go there. When I take my boys to a mall, it's the one thing on my mind the whole time. 30 years ago, when the Unabomber struck, it would not have been on my mind at all. I wouldn't have been thinking about it in any way. When I go on campus with them and in crowds of students, it's the one and only thing on my mind. When we're at a game or a concert or, I don't know, you name it, even a library, even a crowded hall in a library, no matter where there are large numbers of people, I'm thinking, okay, is it going to happen? It's going to happen here. So, anyway, there's a long answer. It's a long digression, but it's what you get with the OGBG on all our channels and at all times, especially when we're talking directly to each other. So I have read Technological Slavery. I read everything in it. I thought the editor did a really good job, but I don't think I would read its equivalent today. I really don't. And then the next book, Jason once again went to a favorite of his, who is not a favorite of mine. This is Perdurabo by Richard Kaczynski, no relation. And this is a biography of Alistair Crowley, who Jason clearly finds him a fascinating figure. I don't. I read this book because it's a yes. I read this book because for 2 reasons. 1, because biographies are my favorite kind of writing, and 2, because I had been told by a number of different people what Jason says in his video, which is that this is clearly the best biography of the man. So I like to do that. I like to get to those no matter what. I would probably read the definitive biography of the Unabomber if such a thing came out. Well, I didn't like it. I thought I recognized how good it was, but I didn't like it. But it is still a yes. Then we move on to another book. This one is there are always a couple of books on these tags that are that strike me as, what could the person have been thinking to put this book on the list under even the hope that I hadn't read it. And in Jason's defense, I should say that in his video he says that he is taking it easy on me, and I think he excessively took it easy on me. I think that he was his library, if you watch some of his old library tours, his library is full of dusty old volumes. he's full of, he could easily, as he says himself in his video, he could easily in 5 seconds pick 8 books that he knows for sure I haven't read. And I think he overcompensated. I think he knows how obscure Byways in Bookland, indeed. I think he knows how obscure a lot of his books are, and I think he overcompensated by picking these books when this next one is called A Fantastic Journey. It's by Paul Murray, and it's a terrific biography of Lafcadio Hearn. And it's, you can't read. I love Lafcadio Hearn. I absolutely love him. I sang the praises of the new Penguin trade paperback of his Japanese ghost stories, and I hope there are lots more. Penguin used to do another volume of his that they don't do anymore. I hope they bring it back. Certainly the Lafcadio Hearn volume that they just did, the Japanese ghost story volumes, has had a lot of high-profile critics and a lot of venues praising it. If Penguin Classics is paying attention, they might do another Lafcadio Hearn next year. That would be great. More the merrier. Every bit of him should be in print. And I, of course, if I love an author like that, if I'm going to read a biography of Alistair Crowley, for Pete's sake, then I'm certainly going to read one of Lafcadio Hearn. And this book is great. It's just great. But I have read it. It is a yes. And the next one as well. I mean, the next one's not a what was he thinking, but there were good odds. There were very good odds, because it was a literary scandal. It's called Misha by Misha DeFonseca, and it's the memoir of a woman who claims that when she was a little girl, she fled Nazi terror across the wilds of Europe and was adopted by wolves. That she was brought into a canine society, and they sort of nurtured her along until she could get where she was going. And the book came out. It was called Misha, and it came out and was the talk of the literary world. Everybody wrote about it, and I read it. I read a copy when it came out. And I know this is going to sound like Monday morning quarterbacking, but nevertheless, when I finished that first copy, long before the scandal erupted, I knew for sure that something was wrong with that part of the story, because none of the descriptions of any kind of a canine social unit were correct, or anything like anything that would happen. It was like, I have been in circumstances like that. I've been in canine societies like that. I grew up in a canine society like that, and I've known many others. I know just how they work. I know exactly how they work. And I know how they don't work. And I know how humans often think they work. And so I finished it thinking, well, okay, memory can play tricks on somebody, but that part is certainly wrong. And then the scandal broke, which turned out to be that almost all of this book was fabricated. Almost all of it was factually, provably wrong. So the book, I imagine now, would be a bit of a curiosity on your shelves, but I did read it. And then the next one is The New Night by Malcolm Barber. And this is also a yes. I have also read this, and I wholeheartedly second Jason's comments about it in his video. He holds up the Canto edition that is the very edition that I read it in. And he praises the book as being down to earth, real, not engaging in any of the stupid Hollywood gauzy romanticizing or fantasizing that tends to happen with this subject. He's entirely right. It was a breath of fresh air. So if you can find it, I strongly recommend it. And then the next one that he recommends is Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition by Frances Yates. And on the one hand, you might think, well, okay, this is abstruse, kind of abstruse literary criticism, so that isn't Steve's alley. Maybe he hasn't read it. But it's Giordano Bruno. And it is, yes, I treaded into it warily, because I don't read this sort of thing, the Hermetic tradition, intellectual tradition, the deep byways of thought traditions and their implications on each other. I don't read that stuff with anything like the skill that Jason reads it, and also the hunger. He also seems to really like it, and it quickly tries my one good nerve. So I went into it with trepidation, thinking, okay, this is going to make a vital figure in history boring, and it doesn't. It doesn't do that at all. I don't know Frances Yates from a hole in the wall, but Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition is, once you get used to the elevated diction, very, very good reading. And in his video, Jason mentions that there is also, ironically, oddly enough, a series of historical murder mysteries starring Giordano Bruno, even though the reader knows that Giordano Bruno came to a horrific end. The reader knows that the whole time. So that's hovering over the whole book. They're by SJ Parris, and there are a whole bunch of them now, and they are terrific. So I want to take the opportunity to add a recommendation. Those Parris Bruno mysteries are amazingly good. they are really, really good, despite the fact, if you know anything about Bruno, you know, as one historian put it somewhat indelicately, but nevertheless true, about 50 years ago, the one thing that you can't forget about Bruno when you're reading about him, or you're reading his writings, or in this case fiction about him, is that he died screaming. That's an indelicate way to put it, but nevertheless, it's true, and it's worth remembering in the whole of the man's life, not just the best parts. And then the next one is Whitechapel Scarlet Tracings by Iain Sinclair, which is apparently a mishmash of antiquarian book fair and Jack the Ripper. This is a no, and Jason's description immediately made me want a copy of the book. I thought I just mentioned it in one of these tags just the other day, just with Todd. I mentioned that I eagerly read everything connected with Jack the Ripper, and here's a book right after I said that is apparently about Jack the Ripper, at least in part, that I haven't read. So I need to see if there's a copy on Book Depository so that I can try it. But there you go. That is the Byways in Bookland edition of the Has Steve Read It tag. And if you were keeping track at home, you realize that there was an upset. The odds makers at Ladbrokes, the odds makers at Lloyd's of London, have been putting strong odds on the members of the OGBG to dethrone the current rulers of the universe, Alan Moreton and Hannah's Books. The odds makers have been putting heavy paper, as they say, on the members of the OGBG to come through, and that hasn't happened, as you can see if you were counting at home. Todd at Todd's Bursting Bookcase got 3. Respectable, but not 4. And Jason at Byways in Bookland, no doubt through what I mentioned, an excess of generosity on his part, but you only get one shot at the bear. He scored a 1. So he is now forced out of the light of civilization, beyond the pig pens, into the wilds and the brambles with Peg from the history shelf. He scored a 1. So, as of this moment, Alan Moreton and Hannah at Hannah's Books are still uncomfortably sharing a narrow throne at the top of Mount Olympus. And starting to look like they're going to be there forever, but there's only one member of the OGBG remaining, and that member is Mark Richardson. Now, I love me Todd's Bursting Bookcase, and of course I love me Byways in Bookland. But I think it's safe to say, despite the fact that Jason and Mark go way back with their weird pinhead archaeological obsessions, I think it's safe to say that when it comes to the whole breadth of the reading taste, Mark and I are very similar. We are very similar. Not to mention the fact that unlike with Todd and unlike with Jason, Mark and I have spent many, many a tipsy evening talking till all hours about every single moment in the aforementioned misspent youth of our reading. We've compared books that we have. It's impossible not to do when you're surrounded by Mark's incredible personal library connection. He's got to be the only librarian, the only head librarian I know. Well, I know 3 librarians right now. One works in the American South. One works in a tiny town in Vermont. One works in a certain institution in Italy that you will have heard of. And Mark is the only head librarian I know whose personal collection dwarfs the size of the collection in his actual library. But it's not just that we've picked books off his collection and talked about them. It's also that we've wool gathered about books that neither one of us owns or have seen in years. In other words, that is one of the many similarities that we have. Mark and I also share a lot of similarities in our personal background. We spent a lot of time on Earth's oceans. A lot of time. In fact, maybe even some of the same time. Although, as I've joked with him, the captains of the vessels that I was on would not have wanted to see him and his crew coming at all. He was in law enforcement, and I was just trying to get from point A to point B. Or as Jake Spoon says it, I was just trying to get through the territory without getting scalped. We would not have wanted to meet Mark, I don't think. But that similarity extends to our reading. And unlike the other members of the OGBG, Mark knows what I've read to a very great degree. Maybe not as much as Deb or Sam, but close to it. And he's next. So how will he do? He has thrown his hat in the ring for the Has Steve Read It tag. Will he dethrone Alan Moreton and Hannah at Hannah's Books? Will he at least score a 3, like his fellow OGBG member, Todd, at Todd's Bursting Bookcase? Or will he be cast into ignominy with Jason at Byways and Bookland? You'll have to tune in next time to find out. I swear, this is better than boxing. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.